First tonight, the debate over expanding the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance to several countries in Central Europe. The debate flared today at the European Security and Cooperation Summit in speeches by President Clinton and Russian President Yeltsin. Since the collapse of communism in Central Europe, there have been proposals and debate over whether and how to expand NATO, which now guarantees mutual protection for 16 Western nations in Europe and the US and Canada, to such countries as Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. Today, at the so-called CSCE summit in Budapest, President Yeltsin repeated his country's opposition to that idea. He warned of a cold peace and said the world could not be run from one capital, a reference to Washington and the US. But the issue of NATO expansion has also divided American officials and analysts. We take up the story with two of them, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and Jack Matlock, former U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia, now a professor at Columbia University. Starting with you, Ambassador Matlock, the Russians are clearly very unhappy about the prospect of expanding NATO. Let's start with this. Actually, what is the U.S. policy right now? How quickly is the Clinton administration pushing to expand NATO, from what you can read?
Well, my understanding is that their position is that the East Europeans should be prepared for NATO, and though no date has been set, the question is not if, but when.
And NATO itself recently, just for background here, recently voted to come up within a year with a list of sort of conditions for membership for potential members. So the issue is moving forward, as you understand it. Is that correct?
The issue is moving forward, but we have to be careful not to trap ourselves in an endless waffle. When we say the issue is not if, but when, the responsibility of national leaders is not to ask rhetorical questions, but to answer them. So we have an obligation to give some sort of an answer to when. And the Russians are not unhappy about the timing. They're unhappy about the fact.
About the fact.
And therefore, we ought to face that as early as possible.
Well, where is the pressure, as you understand it, Jack Matlock, where is the pressure coming from for quick expansion inside NATO, inside? We know that certain Eastern European or Central European countries like Poland would love to be a member quickly. But where is it coming from within inside NATO?
Well, my understanding is that the Germans have been sort of the principal advocates within NATO. They're joined by certain others. I'm one who feels that while we should leave the possibility open, that we should make clear that we would back expansion only if there is a threat which needs to be met. In other words, we should use it to pressure the Russians to ease off on the rhetoric and to behave in a manner which does not threaten these. It seems to me that that would make a better policy than making a decision now and proceeding, whatever the Russians do, to carry it out. Another problem here is that I think it's much more important for the Poles, the Czechs, and the other East Europeans to get in the European Union. This is important economically. They need the markets, and I suspect that some Europeans look at NATO as almost a surrogate for doing what would be a more difficult matter for them, and that is opening their markets to them.
So Mr. Matlock does not see a need to press for expanding NATO to those countries at the moment. What do you see?
The basic problem is as follows. The reason the Germans are interested in the expansion of NATO is that the border of NATO now is at the eastern German border, which doesn't happen to be threatened because that's the border with Poland. If there is a threat, and we can argue whether there is or not, it is at the Polish border it's on the eastern Polish border. So it is sort of senseless to have a guarantee for the borders that are not threatened and no guarantee for the borders that may be threatened. Secondly, I think it is important to define what Europe is supposed to be. If we have two categories of borders in Central Europe, we are creating de facto a no man's land between Russia and Germany, which both of them will then try to fill, encouraging nationalism in both Russia and Germany, and the sort of separate deal for the partition or spheres of influence, or exactly the sort of diplomacy that contributed so much to European tensions and wars before World War II.
Just before we get into too many issues here, let's go back to the question of which borders are threatened and which borders are not threatened. I mean, my understanding is that no borders are threatened at the moment. Even the existing borders of NATO are not threatened at the moment, is that?
No, the existing borders of NATO can't be threatened because they are now adjoining friendly countries. So there's nobody there with any capacity to threaten the borders, at least not from the east. So the problem is whether the new states of Eastern Europe, the former Soviet satellites, should be included in NATO. And if we are reluctant to antagonize the Russians today when they're weak, it is an illusion to think that somewhere 3-4 years down the road we can suddenly move in that direction when they're stronger. Nor am I saying that we should treat the Russians as enemies. What I'm saying is we should have the friendliest political relations with Russia. And the President's visit to the European Security Conference is a good symbol of this. I look at NATO as a safety net, as an insurance policy. And you don't want to wait to take out an insurance policy when the house is already on fire.
But you say, why take out the insurance policy when there's no threat of fire right at the moment? Is that?
Yes, it seems to me that clearly Russia could be a threat in the future. No one can deny that. But Russia now is weak, disorganized, and despite the unfortunate rhetoric, which is worrisome, they don't really have the ability
to threaten. Which American secretaries of state and spokesmen and others continue to say is mostly for domestic consumption.
I think that is true. Nevertheless, it's worrisome, and we should respond to it. But the fact is, it seems to me, we would probably have close to a decade to respond to the successive steps it would take.
Why is that? Spell that out for a moment.
Well, I think right now their economy is in shambles. Their army and their whole military establishment, though it has a lot of weaponry, is not really organized that it can effectively threaten someone else. They have not been able for the last 2 years to cope with the rebellion in one of their own provinces, in Chechnya, which we'll be talking about later. Now, it seems to me they're simply not in a position to threaten their neighbors in a military sense.
If they started to, we would have time to.
That is my contention, and it seems to me that we should make clear the sort of things which, if they should do, we would feel compelled to take countermeasures, and I think that would be a considerable deterrent.
Why do you disagree with that logic? Why provoke the Russians now by extending NATO closer to them, which would imply that the West thought, that Russia was going to become a threat?
Good. First question is, why should they be provoked if we say an attack on Russia is an attack on the whole Atlantic community?
An attack on Russia?
An attack on Poland is an attack on the entire Atlantic region. I don't see why that should provoke them, especially since we could make military. We have, for example, in Eastern Germany, we have military arrangements whereby no non-German troops go beyond the Elbe. We could make similar arrangements for Poland, that no non-Polish troops will be stationed on Polish territory. So then so what we would be extending is a security guarantee that places Poland strictly into...
But why would we need to do that?
Because if we don't do this, we will create, as I've said before, 2 categories of borders in Europe. We are creating a no man's land, and because the reluctance to do that can only indicate that we are not...
Let's have the map up so everybody can follow this. Can you see this map? Where is the no man's land? Would it be...
It would be Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. What you have in yellow on this map would be the no man's land in which both Germany and Russia would try to influence. For example, Yeltsin, in his speech to the General Assembly at the UN, made 2 points. Point 1 was that anything east of that yellow shaded area was connected to Russia as blood brothers.
That's Belarus and Ukraine
and strongly implied that no outside influence was permissible there. Then he said, beyond this, we should get used to open spaces. Open spaces means a kind of neutralism, and neutralism means that Russia has a veto over the disposition, over the political disposition of that area. And the result, I would fear, would be that these countries would be torn into, to make some kind of arrangements. I don't think the Russian situation will ever become a clear-cut military threat. After all, in the middle of the Cold War, people were arguing whether the Russians were threatening.
Well, let's get Jack Matlock's answer to that unless those countries that we just saw are included in NATO, there'll be an open, it'll be a vacuum in which both Russia and Germany and others will want to have influence.
I really don't see that would be more likely to happen if they are not members of NATO than if they are members of NATO. We don't feel that it's necessary to have Austria or Switzerland or Sweden in NATO. They don't feel the necessity. That doesn't make the Russians or others the arbiters of their political decisions. I think that if Poland and the Czech Republic and Slovakia and Hungary, all of them can develop stronger economies and a sense of national strength, that's going to be a sizable deterrent to, you might say, to Russia competing there. So far as competing for influence, there'll be a certain competition for influence anyway. There is one other factor here that we seem to be forgetting, and we did, though it was not a legally binding assurance, we gave categorical assurances to Gorbachev back when the Soviet Union existed, that if a united Germany was able to stay in NATO, NATO would not be moved eastward. And, you know, I think that the current Russian government is very clear
So we would be,
that.
but that assurance was given to the Soviet Union.
That is right. It is not a legally binding, but it was, you might say, a geopolitical deal. And if we simply ignore it, then certainly if I were a Russian, it would be hard for me to interpret this, even though it may not be intended that way, and it is not, as anything less than an attempt to shut Russia off from Eastern Europe.
And that was a line that Yeltsin used today, that it would isolate Russia and sow the seeds of discord.
But here's a country that has 20,000 nuclear weapons. The possibility that Poland would start marching into Russia is zero. And I repeat, this is not, in terms of political architecture, conceived as a Cold War situation, because Russia can participate in the European Security Conference in all the political issues, but one has to keep in mind what a weak Russia has done in the last few months. When we were assembling forces against Iraq a few weeks ago, the Russian foreign minister appeared in Baghdad in a political demonstration that certainly in practice discouraged any American military move on Serbia. They have clearly taken traditional Russian positions, understandably so. But Russia thinks of itself as a major geopolitical player, which it has every right to do.
Would be, under what you propose, would we be extending the American nuclear umbrella eastwards to those countries if they became members, like we would guarantee that any attack on Poland might be met with a nuclear attack? Would we be stationing American troops further east? You mentioned in Poland you would give a guarantee that only be Polish troops, but in other countries, would you be moving American troops further east?
This would be subject to negotiation with the Soviets, with the Russians. I'm more concerned with establishing the principle of who belongs to the Atlantic Alliance than with all the military dispositions. I see no need to station American troops in any of the former Soviet satellites, nor is it conceivable, nor should we, station American nuclear weapons in any of the former satellites. And we could embody this in some sort of an arms control agreement or some other agreement with Russia. What we would do is to create a safety net that says we hope that political conditions will evolve, as Ambassador Matlock says, in which case this is irrelevant. If they don't, however, and we also are discouraging any historic temptations to start throwing their weight again.
And is your point, Ambassador Matlock, that to do this might provoke those historic temptations and inflame the nationalist feelings in Russia, which Yeltsin could not ignore?
This is the problem. It's not that you refrain from doing something because it will offend Russia. If Russia is doing something that we don't want it to do, we should offend them. That's not the problem, but you should need to take into account the impact in the internal politics of the other countries. And it will definitely, as things stand now, leave the impression in Russia that the West is cutting them off and moving the line closer to their border. Now, over time, we might be able to persuade them differently. During German reunification, we brought about nearly a 180-degree turn on several issues through diplomacy and through some changes in our own position. So, you know, perhaps that would happen. But now the impact would be very negative in Moscow, in Russian politics, and would not be a service to those who want democratic institutions.
Okay, I'm sorry, but have to thank you both and leave it there for now. Appreciate you joining us.
With the help of Xero's small business accounting software, I've got the right information at my fingertips.
So business is a breeze. And I've got bigger plans. Search Xero with an X.
A vacation with Norwegian Cruise Line is so much more because there's more included. Like unlimited drinks, followed by amazing meals, plus free Wi-Fi. Oh, hey, Mom, I gotta go. I love you. Experience more with Norwegian.
By the American Vice President Vance when he was at the AI Summit in Paris. And I would say the second rule is clearly aimed at protecting our minors, protecting the free speech. So if you see that there is you know, the child pornography spreads through the platform, and you are getting into the discussion with the platform to do something about it, you do not have the response. So then I think that we have the moral and legal obligations to take action. And the last point I would mention, because this was about the digital service tax, there I think it's also very important to remind that we've been working very closely with the United States on the OECD-driven business, because we wanted to have a global solution to this problem. More or less to respect the rule that the taxes should be paid on the territory where the revenue and profit is generated. And there I think that we had
That's not how we do it in other industries, though, right? We normally.
I mean, what we wanted to avoid was to simply create some possibility for the new modern tax havens or some kind of so-called tax optimization where especially the big companies can simply avoid to pay any taxes. That was the motivation behind that. But we understand that this is something what the U.S. administration wants to discuss, to get the more details, and of course we're prepared for the dialogue.
So now imagine, you know, let's hope everything works out this week, and then, you know, we have a free, and then we sign a EU-US free trade agreement next week. But imagine that doesn't happen. Right, you're going to retaliate. How do you think about that retaliation? Of course, many economists will say, you know, the retaliation also involves harms to your own consumers, to your own businesses. Last time, the EU pretty specifically targeted exporters in Wisconsin, Kentucky, because they were seen as being represented by influential politicians in the U.S. In that similar vein, have you thought about targeting, say, specific senior advisors of the U.S. president and their companies?
No, we are not. Honestly, we are not there yet, because I'm really honored, privileged, and I will present my thanks to the Secretary of Commerce, Mr. Latnik, I think in 1 hour time, that I'm actually his first official guest, because I think it was confirmed yesterday evening.
Yep.
So I wanted to make sure, we had the first video call last week, that I wanted to be here immediately when it's possible. The first day when it's possible is today. I'm here, and I'm here because I want to avoid this lose-lose scenario. I want to avoid this unnecessary pain, and we are ready to get into this, I would say, positive negotiations. And I hope we'll get there. I mean, to do my job, you have to be eternal optimist. I am, because sometimes really things look very, very difficult. I was also, and I'm still responsible for the post-Brexit negotiations. So I know that sometimes it's very difficult before it gets better, but usually it gets better if you have two committed partners, and I believe that this would be the case also for both of us. And but of course, if we will not be able to solve this situation, and if really we will be kind of hit hard arbitrarily without proper justification, so that's only natural that such a big trading bloc like us would react. We don't like it. I know that our businesses don't like it, so there is a pain on the both sides. So we'll do our utmost to avoid it, but if we cannot avoid it, we'll have to act in that regard.
In your opening comments, you mentioned you talked a bit about the sort of broader web of trade relations that the EU has, and how it's still making progress on deepening and liberalizing those trade relations. Obviously, those trade relations are all organized, basically around, international trade law, as conventionally understood until recently. The U.S. now, for a decade or so, has really moved away from abiding by international trade law, except for, in the most flimsy, pretextual way. How do you see that? Do you see the EU and all of its trading partners, maybe including China, as continuing to operate sort of under WTO rules, and then the U.S. is just sort of outside the system, and we deal with it on a case-by-case basis? Or is that not a good description of how you see it?
I think it's a little bit more complex than that, because if you look at WTO, I think that also U.S. until today actually benefits from the law which was laid down and developed over many years. We have a dispute settlement mechanism which is not working because the so-called appellate judge has been not renominated. But otherwise, the system for the global trading is based on this network of the agreements and the rules which have been built and constructed over the years. Of course, if the U.S. would be fully involved, fully back, it would have completely different dimension. But we feel from discussion with our partner that first and foremost the WTO is a very important organization, but of course it needs reforms as well. It has to adjust, it has to adapt to the 21st century. I mean, when WTO became as a I would say successor to the GATT agreements, we didn't have internet at the time. We didn't have the digital services. We didn't have, I would say, many of the products even existing at that stage. So clearly, this has to be fixed. This has to be I would say modernized. And then also, I would say the global trade went to such a dimension that from one side we have this hyper competition, from other side we have, I would say, these global connections and global value chains which need totally different approach. And then I think what needs to be also very clearly addressed that if the WTO mechanism is abused by non-market economies, so we also have to act. And for this, I think it would be much better, much stronger if we can do it together with the United States of America.
One final question before I turn it over to our audience. Next year, the carbon border adjustment is supposed to kick in. How do you think the U.S. is going to respond to that?
I think, that's again something what we have to discuss. I mean, first and foremost, I think what is very important is that we knew that this is something which would raise a lot of questions, and we had only one motivation. We wanted first and foremost to respect Paris Agreement, tackle climate change, and also to prevent so-called carbon leakage, because we've been imposing very high environmental standards for our companies, and then we've been getting the products from abroad where the standards been not respected, and the difference in carbon footprint, for example, for the steel sometimes was 2 or 3 times higher than when produced in the EU. What is, I think, very important for the American audience to know is that this, I think, 6 targeted commodities, US is doing extremely well because you have actually very small carbon footprint. In many of them, you're actually cleaner than the European products. And then also listening to the worries and criticism from the third partners, I think more than 80% of the companies would be exempted from the CBAM because we just really want to focus it on really the big companies, big traders who can do it. But for SMEs and from medium-sized companies, they simply shouldn't be falling under the CBAM. And I believe that this actually would help to those companies which wants to be sustainable, cleaner, which wants to operate with a lower carbon footprint. But I can imagine that the debates on this, on the detail, would be quite demanding. So we have now the team, dedicated team from the EU, which is traveling literally across the globe and which is talking to the countries which might be the most effective, just to explain it, look for the solutions, and do it in a way that we understand each other and we are kind of minimizing the negative impact for the responsible businesses.
Very good. Let's take a couple of questions from the audience. Raise your hand if you have a question. If I point at you, then please wait for the mic to arrive and then state your name, ask your question. Let's go all the way in the back on the left arm. I can barely see. Well, wait, 1 to 2 of you both go.
Hi, I'm Ari from Politico. Thank you very much for doing this. I wanted to see, Trump yesterday said that the EU had lowered its 10% duty on imports on vehicles to 2.5%. I guess I'm curious about a reaction on that. And would that be something that you folks are considering or actively talking about? Thank you very much.
With Asana, AI teammates can pull real-time data and help keep work on track, so every team can work smarter and faster. Asana, the #1 AI work management platform. Try for free today at asana.com.
You want?
Yeah, let's do the other question as well. Yeah, sorry.
Hi, my name is Gregor Schwung. I'm from the German newspaper Die Welt. I would like to ask, how do you go and do these negotiations with an administration who has a different view on facts? When we talk about the VAT, for example, you made clear in a long document what it is. Clearly, they don't understand it. So what's your approach to something like that?
Thank you very much. So you see, we need good journalists to ask good questions because they're usually first one to break the ice. On the first question, you would recall that I think it was the announcement by President Trump, I think last week, that he would like to go down the path of reciprocal tariffs, and I was reacting to this very clearly. So if we are going to talking about lowering the tariffs, even eliminating the tariffs, let's say for industrial products, this would be something which we are ready to discuss. We are ready to go for it. We are ready to discuss, including we are ready to look at the tariffs for the cars, because also the example I used in my introductory remarks. For US, this peak import duty is for pickup trucks and vans, if I recall, it's 25%, and for personal vehicles from Europe, it's 10%. So let's look at it. But we would like, and that would be also my plea this afternoon, to discuss with my American partners. That what are the topics our American partners would like to discuss? What are the issues? So we can have we can start the process. We can discuss it item by item and look for the common solution in some, I would say, solid package. So that would be, I would say, my request and my plea with my counterparts. And if it comes to the second question, look, we have 2 very massive economies, and when I was looking at our Eurostat figures, so this is the European Statistics Office, and American Statistics Office, you might have a situation that you have slightly different figures. There might be different methodology, there might be a different approach. But again, it's up to us, and it's, I would say, responsibility of our experts to figure out what is the baseline, what are the figures we can agree upon, because once you know the problem, once you're able to measure it, then you know how to address it. And this is, I would say, the method which we will be also proposing in this particular case, including explaining how the VAT works, that I would say that we can really compare it to the sales tax here. It's paid by the consumers. It's never paid by the businesses, because businesses are getting reimbursed. And I think it's we are not alone who is using it, because I think it's more than 150 countries on this planet which have the same system. So we hope that we'll be able to explain this, to discuss it, and I believe in good faith negotiations, and that would be clearly our goal.
Have you suggested to the U.S. that maybe we too should adopt the value-added tax?
I am brave and courageous man, but I would like to start from the, let's say, lower ambition.
Fair enough. Let's do a question over here, if we have any. Yes. Go ahead. Please wait for the mic. Sorry.
Hi, Barbara Noordermeer of the Dutch Financial Daily. Thank you so much for your time. I was wondering what result of your visit this week will have you travel back to Europe, relieved, confident, excited maybe even, back to Europe, and how far or how close to that are you?
That's a very good question, but I think I'll be able to tell you tomorrow. I think we planned the press conference, I think tomorrow morning. I'm looking at 9, I think. So then I will be able to share the impression from the meetings which we have, I would say, the whole afternoon today. So that would be the time to ask this question. I will do my best to give you the answer. But of course, there is enormous interest in this visit, in our discussion, because I mean, I would say that our trade relationship is so big that if one of us sneezes, the rest of the trading world might get pneumonia. So I think we have to be very, very responsible how we deal with each other, and how we deal with this artery of the global trade. I mean, it's more than 30% of trading is done just between two of us, and I know that almost straight from the plane, when I will be back in Europe, we go to meet our member states and discuss further steps, because this is really like one of the top priorities, how to deal with these issues, how to deal it constructively. The US is our closest ally. We have a lot of things on the global agenda to deal with, and we definitely want to have a good and constructive partnership and relationship with US.
I think we have time for one more question before I need to let you go, so you can go to the White House. Unless someone immediately raises his arm. Oh, there we go. You're getting his question, not mine. Yeah.
Hello, Henry from AEI. A question about the upcoming German elections. So that's obviously next Sunday. With Germany being like Europe's largest economy, do you see there being any large consequence, a big directional change on part of the EU?
I think that if you look at the well-established parties, of course, I'm following also personally very, very closely. I mean, we are working on many projects in a very tight way with Germany, with the German government. Of course, the Christian Democrats are extremely well represented in the European Parliament. They are the leading forces. So I think that I have a kind of solid understanding about the key parties in Germany. So I'm absolutely convinced that the next coalition government, because this is what is the most probable result, will be absolutely pro-European, would be very strong on defense, would be very strong on reforms in the European Union, would be very pushy or on lowering administrative burden, will be very tough on cutting red tape, and would have very clear expectations how to handle better the issues linked with migration, and how to make sure that the European Union as such is acting much faster, is more agile, and simply corresponds to these very, very dynamic times we are living in. Of course, as you see, everywhere the political situations is quite polarized. It's my personal observation. Sometimes I have a feeling that we still didn't manage to adapt the traditional, say, democratic instruments to this fast-paced politics generated by the social media. But I'm sure we'll learn it. We find a way how to do that, and it would be in the end for the benefit of the democratic functioning.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, with that, Commissioner, thank you so much for coming to AEI. Welcome back anytime. Good luck. Good luck later today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.